What if the key to changing your life was just one simple glass in the morning? Not a miracle cure. Not a surgery. Not a 90-day transformation program. Just one glass. Every morning. For 10 days. Grace Miller didn't believe in life-changing habits anymore. She was 67, retired, and had long accepted the aching knees, the widening waistline, and the solitude that echoed through her quiet house in Tampa, Florida. But everything changed that Tuesday morning at the grocery store. The air inside Publix was crisp, humming with fluorescent light and the soft roll of cart wheels. Grace reached for a bunch of organic kale, something she hadn't bought in years but picked up out of guilt, when the world suddenly tilted sideways. Her vision blurred. Her chest tightened. A cold sweat broke across her forehead. Then, everything went dark. When she came to, she was flat on the cold tile floor. A stranger's voice murmured something distant, maybe a question. Her ears rang. People walked past her like she was just another item on the bottom shelf. Her fingers clutched the kale like it might save her. Then, her phone buzzed. It was a FaceTime call. From Alyssa, her youngest daughter, the one who lived in Denver with her 2 toddlers and a husband who traveled too much. Grace blinked into the screen. Her face appeared pale, disoriented, sagging. "Mom." Alyssa's voice cracked through the speaker. "Mom, what happened? Are you okay? Why do you look like that?" Grace tried to sit up. Her head throbbed. I just got a little dizzy. Have you eaten anything today?" Grace paused. Had she? She couldn't remember. A Publix employee came over. Young guy, maybe high school. He offered a bottle of water and knelt beside her. "Ma'am, do you need an ambulance?" "No," Grace said too quickly. "I'm fine." "Really?" "Mom, you don't look fine," Alyssa said. "I'll eat when I get home." Alyssa sighed. "You said that yesterday, and the day before." "Mom, you're not eating right. And your weight." Grace flinched. She didn't need the reminder. She saw it every time she passed a mirror. The soft roll over her waistband, the way her arms jiggled when she reached for a cup. She had given up fighting it. What was the point? But Alyssa wasn't done. "You've got to start taking care of yourself. You said you'd try that thing I sent you." Grace frowned. "What thing?" "The Elon Musk interview. The health thing. Remember? Just one glass every morning for 10 days. It's not about dieting, it's about energy and inflammation and metabolism. He drinks it himself." Grace sighed. "You really believe that?" Alyssa narrowed her eyes. "Do you believe in feeling like this for the next 20 years? That question hit harder than Grace expected. Back home, Grace sat in the kitchen, the kale abandoned on the counter. She stared at the screen of her old iPad, still logged into Facebook. An ad popped up. "Seniors are doing this one thing in the morning and losing belly fat fast. Recommended by Elon Musk." She rolled her eyes. Clickbait. But then, curiosity nudged her. She clicked. It was a clip from an old podcast. Elon Musk, casually sipping something from a clear glass. He was talking about mental clarity, gut health, and how the first 10 minutes of your day could change the next 10 years of your life. "We underestimate the power of small, consistent actions," he said. "This glass. It's not magic. It's just the right inputs, early in the day. Biology doesn't lie." He didn't sound like a guru. He sounded logical. Grace leaned in. That night, she sat in bed with a notebook. She wrote out the ingredients Alyssa had texted her months ago but she'd ignored. 1 cup warm water. Juice of half a lemon. 1 teaspoon apple cider vinegar. Half a teaspoon grated fresh ginger. A dash of cayenne pepper. A few drops of olive oil. Grace raised an eyebrow. It sounded disgusting. But then again, not as bad as collapsing in the middle of a grocery store. She stared at the mirror across from her bed. 10 days, she whispered to herself. Just 10 days. Then, for the first time in years, she opened the top drawer of her nightstand. Inside was a stack of old letters, unsent. Written to her husband John, who had passed away 7 years earlier. She pulled one out and added a line at the bottom. I think I'm ready to try again, John. Not just with my health. With everything. She placed it back, folded her hands on her lap, and let the silence hold her. The next morning, Grace stood in her tiny kitchen, stirring the odd mixture in a glass. The warm lemony scent mixed with the bite of vinegar and ginger. She raised it to her lips, hesitated, and whispered. For you, John. The liquid burned slightly going down. Her face twisted. It wasn't pleasant. But something about it, the ritual, the act of deciding to do something, felt strangely powerful. She rinsed the glass and stood still, watching the morning light filter through the blinds. It cast long golden lines across the floor. A small voice inside her, one she hadn't heard in years, whispered. You're not done yet. Before she left the kitchen, she opened her Facebook and typed. Trying something new. Just one glass every morning. 10 days. Let's see what happens. Hashtag Senior Restart Hashtag Elon Challenge. She hit post. And just like that, the first domino fell. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before Grace Miller became the woman collapsed on aisle 4, she was someone entirely different. She was Gracie Lynn to her parents, born in 1957 in a small Georgia town where everyone knew your middle name and your Saturday plans. The only girl in a family of 4 boys, Grace learned early how to hold her own. While her brothers played football, Grace built model rockets and stayed up reading Popular Mechanics by flashlight under her blanket. By the time she turned 13, she could take apart a VCR and put it back together, which she did just for fun. Her dad called her his little engineer. Her mom. Not so much. You'll never find a husband with oil on your fingers, she'd say, shaking her head. Grace found one anyway. She met John Miller at MIT in 1975. He was tall, lanky, and had the kind of smirk that said I'm smart and I know it, but never made you feel small. He was studying aerospace engineering. She was one of only 6 women in the entire computer science department. Their first conversation was an argument over data compression. Their second was over pizza. By the third, they were inseparable. They got married in 1980, moved to California, and built a life in the blooming fields of Silicon Valley. Grace worked at one of the first software companies to develop custom operating systems. Back then, women in tech were rare, and respected ones even rarer. But Grace had grit, and John had her back. They had 2 kids, Ethan and Alyssa. For decades, Grace juggled it all: code, diapers, deadlines, recitals. She would work 12-hour shifts, rush home to make dinner, then sneak back to her desk once the kids were asleep to debug firmware. She was exhausted but alive. A woman on a mission. And most days, she felt unstoppable. But time has a cruel way of shifting the lens. John was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2015. 6 months later, he was gone. Just, gone. Grace retired early. The company changed hands, younger engineers took over. They were fast and brilliant and referred to Grace as "ma'am." She stopped correcting them after a while. With John gone and the kids out of the house, her world shrank. Mornings stretched into afternoons without meaning. Meals became microwave dinners. Conversations were limited to pharmacy clerks and Amazon drivers. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed, replaced by fatigue she couldn't explain. She'd sit in the same armchair for hours, watching Jeopardy reruns and feeling invisible. It wasn't depression, not exactly. It was more like erosion. A slow, subtle wearing away of purpose. She wasn't unhappy. But she wasn't much of anything. Ethan visited once every few months. Always in a rush. Always on Bluetooth, talking work while helping her set up the Wi-Fi, again. He'd pat her on the shoulder like a colleague. Alyssa called more often, sometimes daily, though always in 5-minute bursts between daycare pickups and conference calls. Grace never said how much she missed them. She didn't want to be a burden. Instead, she wrote long, rambling letters to John. Dozens of them. About the neighbors. The aches in her back. The way the soup aisle had too many choices now. She poured every thought into those pages, folded them neatly, and placed them in the drawer. He never answered, of course. But somehow, writing made the silence less heavy. People around her aged too, her friends, neighbors, former colleagues. Some moved to Arizona or the Carolinas for better weather. Others moved into assisted living. Some stopped calling altogether. Grace stayed. She told herself she liked the quiet. That she didn't need anyone. That she was fine. But truthfully, she was waiting. For what, she wasn't sure. A spark. A shake. Something to remind her that life was still moving and she could still move with it. That spark came in the form of a collapsed moment in a grocery store. And one bitter glass of lemon ginger vinegar the next morning. Her second morning with the glass felt less bitter. Maybe her taste buds were adjusting. Maybe her brain was already building new pathways. Ones that said, hey, you're doing something again. Something on purpose. She washed the glass carefully. Wrote in her notebook. Day 2. I feel weirdly clear-headed. Still tired. But, lighter. Not physically. Mentally. She didn't tell anyone about the journal. Mornings stretched into afternoons without meaning. Meals became microwave dinners. Conversations were limited to pharmacy clerks and Amazon drivers. The sparkle in her eyes dimmed, replaced by fatigue she couldn't explain. She'd sit in the same armchair for hours, watching Jeopardy reruns and feeling invisible. It wasn't depression, not exactly. It was more like erosion. A slow, subtle wearing away of purpose. She wasn't unhappy. But she wasn't much of anything. Ethan visited once every few months. Always in a rush. Always on Bluetooth, talking work while helping her set up the Wi-Fi, again. He'd pat her on the shoulder like a colleague. Alyssa called more often, sometimes daily, though always in 5-minute bursts between daycare pickups and conference calls. Grace never said how much she missed them. She didn't want to be a burden. Instead, she wrote long, rambling letters to John. Dozens of them. About the neighbors. The aches in her back. The way the soup aisle had too many choices now. She poured every thought into those pages, folded them neatly, and placed them in the drawer. He never answered, of course. But somehow, writing made the silence less heavy. People around her aged too, her friends, neighbors, former colleagues. Some moved to Arizona or the Carolinas for better weather. Others moved into assisted living. Some stopped calling altogether. Grace stayed. She told herself she liked the quiet. That she didn't need anyone. That she was fine. But truthfully, she was waiting. For what, she wasn't sure. A spark. A shake. Something to remind her that life was still moving and she could still move with it. That spark came in the form of a collapsed moment in a grocery store. And one bitter glass of lemon ginger vinegar the next morning. Her second morning with the glass felt less bitter. Maybe her taste buds were adjusting. Maybe her brain was already building new pathways. Ones that said, "Hey, you're doing something again. Something on purpose." She washed the glass carefully. Wrote in her notebook. Day 2. I feel weirdly clear-headed. Still tired. But, lighter. Not physically. Mentally. She didn't tell anyone about the journal. On the third morning of her 10-day challenge, Grace took a slower sip of the glass. Her nose still wrinkled at the vinegar, but her stomach didn't protest this time. In fact, there was a weird sense of clarity. The kind you get after a long cry or a really good sneeze. Not happiness. But release. She rinsed the glass and walked to the bedroom, drawn again to that drawer. Today, she didn't just read the letters, she pulled a fresh page from her notebook and sat down to write. Dear John. Today's glass didn't taste as awful. Progress, right? Cynthia messaged me. Remember her? The one who used to fall asleep on her keyboard at micro-axis. She's doing the challenge too. Says it makes her feel like she has a mission again. I think that's what I'm craving, John. A mission. Something that makes me wake up before the alarm. I used to have that. I had you. I had code and chaos and kids screaming for mac and cheese. Now I have silence. And heartburn. But also, something new. A question. What if I'm not finished yet? I know that sounds crazy. I'm almost 70. I don't even like TikTok. But maybe, just maybe, I can still change something. In me. Around me. It starts with a glass. A ridiculous, sour, fiery little glass. And maybe it ends with me being able to look in the mirror and not see a ghost. Miss you every minute. G. She folded the paper slowly. Slid it on top of the others. The stack was getting thicker. Heavier. It made her wonder if grief was like sediment, layered over time, each piece pressing into the next until it became something solid and immovable. But this new letter felt different. Less weight. More air. Later that day, Grace sat on the back porch with a cup of chamomile tea, listening to the wind rustle through the grapefruit tree she and John had planted 20 years ago. The same tree that had nearly died the year he did. She hadn't tended it well. Forgotten to water it. Didn't care if it survived. But last spring, it bloomed. Small white flowers. Then fruit. It was like the tree had decided, if I'm still here, I might as well grow. Grace found herself nodding to it like an old friend. That evening, she sorted through a box of old tech equipment in the garage. Ethernet cables, dusty hard drives, a circuit board she couldn't quite part with. She plugged in an old laptop. It blinked slowly to life. The desktop loaded with familiar icons, one of them labeled Dream Projects. She clicked it. Inside, mock-ups, presentation decks, and an unfinished pitch titled Senior Tech U. Her original idea had been to teach tech to seniors, apps, passwords, AI. Nothing revolutionary. Just empowerment. John had encouraged it. Said she should turn it into a real platform. She never did. Grace stared at the blinking cursor. What if it wasn't too late? That night, she wrote again. Dear John. I opened the laptop. The old one. The one with our trip to Oregon still in the downloads folder. And the folder for Senior Tech U. You told me to finish it. I didn't. But maybe I can now. Or something like it. Maybe this glass thing isn't about losing weight. Maybe it's about waking something up that's been asleep in me. Maybe it's not too late. I want you to be proud of me. I want to be proud of me. One more day, one more letter. G. The next morning, she added something new to her ritual. After drinking the glass, she opened her notes app and dictated a sentence out loud. Day 4. I don't hate the taste anymore. I hate how long I ignored myself. She paused. That was a lot to admit. But it felt good. Real. Not performative like a filtered post. Not fake happy like one of those blessed Instagram captions. Just a woman, in her kitchen, speaking out loud to herself for the first time in years. She opened Facebook and posted again. Day 4, I don't know if this glass is magic, but it's making me feel like I'm here again. Like I matter. Anyone else feel this way? #senior restart. The comments poured in this time. I've been trying this too. Day 2 and my knees don't creak as loud lol. I needed this today. Thank you. Grace, you're the reason I didn't skip my glass this morning. Grace blinked. People were listening. Maybe even, following her lead. That night, before bed, she wrote one last note. John, I think this is bigger than just me. Maybe it started as just a drink. But now. It's a reason. A rhythm. A chance. And for the first time in years, she slept through the night. No dreams. Just peace. Grace hadn't planned to spend half her morning watching a tech billionaire talk about metabolism. But sometimes, life reroutes you in the most unexpected ways. It was day 5. The morning light fell across the kitchen just as she finished her now familiar drink. Her taste buds had stopped fighting it. In fact, she caught herself savoring the hint of ginger and the lemony warmth sliding down her throat. Almost, comforting. She sat at the counter with her iPad, sipping coffee, scrolling. Notifications buzzed from her last Facebook post, people asking for her recipe, others tagging their moms. Then she saw it. A video she'd scrolled past too many times. This time, she didn't skip it. Elon Musk talks morning routine, longevity, and mental energy, full interview. Duration, 52 to 17. Grace rolled her eyes, but tapped play anyway. The video opened with Elon seated in a stark, clean room with a black t-shirt and an expression that looked more philosopher than CEO. The host asked the first question. Why are you so focused on human longevity now? Elon leaned forward. Because the longer we live with clarity and function, the more we can build. The more we can teach, pass down, contribute. A longer life isn't about fear of death, it's about maximizing contribution. Grace tilted her head. That was, not what she expected. 15 minutes in, the conversation turned practical. Elon described what he did each morning to prime the brain and gut. Grace perked up. He listed off a set of ingredients nearly identical to what she'd been drinking. Warm water. Lemon. Apple cider vinegar. Cayenne. Ginger. Healthy fat. It's not a detox. That's marketing fluff, Elon said. It's about inflammation reduction, gut-brain balance, and mitochondrial optimization. She paused the video. Meta what? She scribbled the word into her notebook and looked it up. Mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. A vital component in energy production, aging, and metabolic health. So this wasn't snake oil. This was science. Real, measurable, replicable. She hit play again. The interviewer leaned in. So you're saying this one habit actually boosts your cognitive performance? Elon nodded. Most people underestimate how much of their brain fog, fatigue, even emotional regulation, is linked to gut chemistry. You fix that, you get more than just energy. You get a better version of yourself. Grace stared at the screen. That's exactly how she'd felt the past few days. Like some fog had started to lift. Like maybe her thoughts had more room to breathe. Was that gut chemistry? Or was that hope? Or both? Elon went on. Every morning, you can choose entropy or order. I choose order, one small habit at a time. Grace whispered it aloud. Order, one small habit at a time. She paused the video again. Her kitchen wasn't futuristic. Her counter was chipped. The blender smelled faintly like garlic no matter how many times she cleaned it. But in that moment, it felt like a laboratory. Like ground zero for her own reinvention. And that drink, that ridiculous little glass of tangy fire, was her first controlled experiment. After the video ended, she sat in silence. A long one. The kind of silence not filled with loneliness, but possibility. Then she opened her notebook and wrote. Elon doesn't drink the glass because it's trendy. He drinks it because it clears the path. I want that too. I want clarity. I want to be the better version of me, before it's too late. She looked at the to-do list on her fridge. Doctor appointment, refill prescription, clean out closet. She grabbed a pen and added one more line. Start building again. That afternoon, she walked to the neighborhood library. Not to read. To ask about community rooms. She wanted to run a small session, intro to iPhones for seniors. Something simple. Just the basics, she told the young man at the front desk. How to text, how to FaceTime, how to protect yourself from scams. He smiled. That's awesome. You a teacher? Grace hesitated. Then smiled back. Not yet. Back at home, she got another message from Cynthia. Watched the Musk video. You were right. This is more than health. It's mindset. I'm all in. Grace replied. We're not done building. Let's help others remember that too. That evening, as she stirred her stir-fry and danced to earth, wind and fire alone in the kitchen, she laughed out loud. Because she felt alive. Not young. Not new. But fully here. And she couldn't remember the last time she danced without a reason. Before bed, she pulled out her notebook again. No letter tonight. Just one sentence underlined 3 times. Day 5, I still have something worth waking up for. And for the first time, when she looked in the mirror, she didn't see an aging woman who'd let herself fade. She saw a builder. A thinker. A woman with a formula. A plan. And a glass of clarity. It was the night before day 1, and Grace stared at the ingredients on the kitchen counter like they were a science experiment she hadn't quite agreed to. Apple cider vinegar. Check. Lemon. Check. Ginger. Check. Cayenne pepper. Check. A dash of honey. Hot water. Check. She had seen the list in the Facebook group and heard about it on podcasts. In the early hours of morning, before the first sip of caffeine had even graced her lips, Grace had rolled her eyes at the whole concept. Seriously, she muttered to herself. How could a single glass do anything? But something inside her, an itch she couldn't ignore, pushed her to give it a try. Maybe, just maybe, there was something in this idea that might spark a change. She poured the apple cider vinegar first, watching the brown liquid swirl in the glass. Then she added the rest of the ingredients, one by one. Each item seemed more foreign than the last. With a long, drawn-out sigh, Grace raised the glass to her lips. Her fingers felt too stiff as she clutched it. Her stomach tightened. She felt like she was about to swallow a potion she didn't believe in. She had read about the health benefits. But still, one drink. One drink to fix everything. The glass trembled slightly in her hand as she brought it closer to her mouth. I can do this, she said to herself, her reflection staring back in disbelief. Just a sip. And she drank. The first taste was, exactly what she'd expected. Awful. The vinegar hit her immediately, followed by the sharp sting of ginger, and then the lingering heat of cayenne pepper on her tongue. Her throat felt like it was on fire. She choked. Gasped for air. Good grief, this is horrible. Grace set the glass down on the counter, shaking her head. Her eyes watered, and for a moment, she couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. She had no idea what made her think this was a good idea. For a few minutes, she stood there, feeling the sharp tang of the drink swirl in her gut, waiting for some miraculous transformation. But nothing happened. No sudden burst of energy. No feeling of weightlessness. Just, a very full stomach and a slight burn in the back of her throat. By the time she finished, she had already decided that this was a failed experiment. It wasn't going to work. She wasn't going to be one of those people who changed her life by sipping on something disgusting every morning. Yet, as she glanced at the glass in front of her, there was a small voice in her head, something she had buried for years, that said, maybe you should give it one more chance. The next morning, on day 2, Grace walked into the kitchen and stared at the ingredients again. The glass was still dirty from the night before. But this time, her hand didn't hesitate. She filled the glass, poured the apple cider vinegar, squeezed the lemon, grated the ginger, and even added the cayenne pepper without a second thought. As the water boiled, she remembered what she had heard Elon say in the interview. Small habits create long-lasting results. She picked up the glass, her hand steady now, and took a deep breath. The first sip was almost as painful as the first day. But there was a difference this time. Grace didn't flinch. She felt the heat travel down her throat, but she didn't choke. Her body seemed to accept it. She didn't rush to the sink. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table and sipped slowly, letting the warmth of the drink settle inside her. By the time she finished, the sour taste still lingered, but there was something new. A sense of hope. A small whisper, deep inside, that maybe this time, it would be different. Day 3 came around, and the routine started to feel less strange. Grace wasn't excited, but she wasn't dreading the glass either. She added her ingredients automatically and drank it without protest. The taste didn't improve much, but something was shifting. On day 4, she even found herself taking a second sip, without the usual grimace. The heat wasn't as overwhelming. Her stomach didn't flip as much. In fact, she felt a strange sense of accomplishment as she finished the glass. It wasn't magic. But the subtle shifts were starting to show. After day 4, Grace began to notice small changes, things she hadn't expected to feel so soon. She woke up with more energy. Not a burst of energy, but a steady, gentle rise as if her body was ready to move. Her skin seemed brighter. Maybe it was the hydration. Maybe it was the fact that she was drinking something that was good for her after all these years of neglecting herself. She felt clearer. Mentally. Emotionally. She had a little more patience with her day. With herself. Her mind wasn't racing like it used to, and the afternoon fatigue that used to hit like a wall was nowhere to be found. Grace was starting to wonder, could this tiny glass actually be doing something? By the time day 6 came around, the changes were more noticeable. She was sleeping better at night. Less restless. More peaceful. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to soften, too. Not in terms of weight loss, though that would come, eventually, but in the way she saw herself. She wasn't a woman defeated by time. She wasn't an invisible senior just going through the motions. She was someone who had started something. Someone who could still change. And that was more powerful than anything she had felt in years. That night, Grace sat down with her notebook again, tapping the pen against her lips. It was time for a new entry. Day 5, it's not magic. It's patience. I'm starting to believe in small steps. I might just be capable of something bigger than I thought. As she closed her notebook, a quiet realization washed over her. She wasn't waiting for a miracle. She wasn't just trying to lose weight. She was looking for something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with the number on the scale or the mirror. Grace was looking for her own spark again. That's what this glass had given her, a reason to keep going. And that was worth more than any flat belly. It was the end of day 7, and Grace couldn't remember the last time she had felt this proud of herself. Sure, she hadn't lost any noticeable weight yet. Her belly was still there. But she felt different. It wasn't the superficial stuff. It was something deeper. Her energy had increased, her skin looked a little brighter, and the fatigue she had grown so used to in her daily routine seemed to have evaporated. She was beginning to believe this small habit might actually be the key to something more. As the evening sun bathed her kitchen in warm, golden light, Grace found herself on the phone with her best friend, Cynthia. "Okay, don't laugh," Grace said, her voice cautious. "I'm listening." "What's up?" Cynthia replied. "I've been doing that thing. You know, the drink I told you about." Cynthia paused. "You mean that weird concoction of vinegar and cayenne?" "Yes. That thing," Grace chuckled nervously. "Wait. You're still doing it?" "I am. And I don't know why, but I think it's actually working." "Working? As in, it's making you feel better?" Grace leaned against the counter, watching the way the light reflected off the edge of her glass. "Yes, that's exactly it. I'm feeling more energized in the mornings, and I'm not as tired in the afternoons. It's like something has shifted, and I don't even know how to explain it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Grace started to feel unsure. Had she sounded crazy? Finally, Cynthia spoke. "Grace, I'm proud of you. You've been trying for so long to find something that clicks. You've kept pushing even when things didn't work out." "I know, but it's just a drink, right?" Grace laughed. "Maybe I'm just imagining things." "Maybe," Cynthia said, "but maybe not. You know what? I'm gonna try it. I mean, what have I got to lose?" Grace blinked. You're going to try it?" "Yeah. Why not? I need to try something new. I'll start tomorrow." Grace felt a spark of excitement. "You're really going to do it?" "I am," Cynthia said with a grin in her voice. "And we can compare notes. Maybe it'll be our new thing." "I think it's a deal," Grace agreed, laughing at the idea of them both sipping vinegar concoctions together. It was the first time in ages Grace had felt connected to someone over something so small but so important. She wasn't just drinking this glass for herself anymore. Now she had someone else who was with her on this journey, and somehow, that made all the difference. The next morning, day 8, was a turning point. Grace woke up before her alarm, something that had never happened before. She didn't feel sluggish, groggy, or weighed down by the night. There was no dragging herself out of bed. She simply woke up, stretched, and felt ready to take on the day. She followed her usual morning routine. Boiling water. Squeezing fresh lemon juice. Adding the ginger and the honey. The vinegar was still the hardest part, but she powered through. Every sip felt a little easier. By the time she was done, she didn't feel that usual pang of dread. Instead, she felt motivated. She grabbed her notebook and jotted down her thoughts. Day 8. I woke up early, and for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm dragging. Maybe it's the drink. Maybe it's me. Either way, I'm proud. That afternoon, Grace had another small victory. She was meeting Cynthia for lunch at their favorite cafe. Cynthia had been uncharacteristically quiet as she picked at her salad. Grace had noticed the change, but hadn't said anything, until Cynthia looked up, smiled, and said, "You were right. It's been 2 days, and I feel better. Not perfect. But better. I'm actually feeling some energy by midday." Grace beamed. "I told you. It's not magic. It's just small things adding up. Cynthia nodded. I'm gonna stick with it. If it's working for you, it might just work for me too. Grace couldn't stop smiling. It wasn't just the drink anymore. It was about feeling like she had taken control of something in her life. Her choices, her health, her energy. And now, Cynthia was on board. Maybe the universe was giving her a sign. Later that night, Grace couldn't help herself. She pulled up her old Facebook account and shared a quick post. 7 days in. A small habit, a glass every morning. The change is real. More energy, clearer mind. And if you're thinking about trying it, I say go for it. It's not perfect, but it's progress. Hashtag small steps, hashtag health, hashtag new beginnings. The post wasn't anything dramatic. She wasn't selling anything. It was just a small note to share her experience. The comments started coming in immediately. Wait, you really think this is working? I might give it a try. Thanks for sharing. I need some of that energy. Gonna try it tomorrow. Grace smiled at the responses. She wasn't just following a trend. She was part of something bigger now. People were watching her progress. They were rooting for her. And, honestly, she was rooting for them too. That night, as she tucked herself into bed, she reflected on her day. It had been a simple one. No earth-shattering revelations. But for the first time in a long time, Grace felt like she was on the right track. The glass wasn't some magical cure, but it was giving her something she hadn't had in years, hope. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, small steps. One sip at a time. It had been 10 days since Grace started her morning routine of the mysterious drink. She had faithfully sipped on the concoction every morning, and for the first few days, things had been looking up. Her energy was higher, her skin was glowing, and she felt lighter. But now, as she stood in front of her bathroom mirror on day 10, something had changed. Her belly was still there. Sure, she had noticed a slight flattening, but it was nothing dramatic. She felt the same way she always did after a few days of progress, stuck. Grace sighed and leaned against the sink, studying her reflection. She knew she wasn't going to transform overnight, but wasn't this supposed to work faster? Why hadn't it worked faster? She rubbed the back of her neck. That nagging feeling of disappointment began to creep in. She had hoped for a more obvious result. She had followed the plan to a T, drank the glass without fail, and yet, she hadn't seen the changes she expected. There were no miracle transformations. No drastic weight loss. No flat belly. She had heard of people going through the same thing. They had started the challenge full of enthusiasm, only to hit a wall after a few days. She had read about the plateau effect in health articles and blogs, but now she was living it. It was as if her body had decided it was done with the changes, no more progress, no more surprises. And it left her wondering if it was time to quit. Later that morning, Grace sat at her kitchen table, holding the familiar glass. Her reflection on the counter stared back at her, the same reflection that had looked at her a week ago. Nothing had really changed. She didn't feel like she was winning. Not yet, anyway. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her from her thoughts. It was Cynthia. The comments started coming in immediately. Wait, you really think this is working? I might give it a try. Thanks for sharing. I need some of that energy. Gonna try it tomorrow. Grace smiled at the responses. She wasn't just following a trend. She was part of something bigger now. People were watching her progress. They were rooting for her. And, honestly, she was rooting for them too. That night, as she tucked herself into bed, she reflected on her day. It had been a simple one. No earth-shattering revelations. But for the first time in a long time, Grace felt like she was on the right track. The glass wasn't some magical cure, but it was giving her something she hadn't had in years: hope. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, small steps. One sip at a time. It had been 10 days since Grace started her morning routine of the mysterious drink. She had faithfully sipped on the concoction every morning, and for the first few days, things had been looking up. Her energy was higher, her skin was glowing, and she felt lighter. But now, as she stood in front of her bathroom mirror on day 10, something had changed. Her belly was still there. Sure, she had noticed a slight flattening, but it was nothing dramatic. She felt the same way she always did after a few days of progress: stuck. Grace sighed and leaned against the sink, studying her reflection. She knew she wasn't going to transform overnight, but wasn't this supposed to work faster? Why hadn't it worked faster? She rubbed the back of her neck. That nagging feeling of disappointment began to creep in. She had hoped for a more obvious result. She had followed the plan to a T, drank the glass without fail, and yet, she hadn't seen the changes she expected. There were no miracle transformations. No drastic weight loss. No flat belly. She had heard of people going through the same thing. They had started the challenge full of enthusiasm, only to hit a wall after a few days. She had read about the plateau effect in health articles and blogs, but now she was living it. It was as if her body had decided it was done with the changes: no more progress, no more surprises. And it left her wondering if it was time to quit. Later that morning, Grace sat at her kitchen table, holding the familiar glass. Her reflection on the counter stared back at her, the same reflection that had looked at her a week ago. Nothing had really changed. She didn't feel like she was winning. Not yet, anyway. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her from her thoughts. It was Cynthia. Instead, she focused on what she had gained over the past week: more energy, better mornings, and the belief that small steps could create something lasting. The weight on the scale could wait. It was the internal shift that mattered right now. She poured the apple cider vinegar and added the cayenne pepper, watching the liquid swirl in the glass. Her hand was steady. She was getting used to this. With a deep breath, she took the first sip. The burn still hit her throat, but now it felt almost comforting, like a reminder that she was doing something good for herself. Grace took another sip, smiling to herself. That night, after her glass, she wrote in her journal. Day 10, the scale didn't move. But I'm still here. I'm still doing this. There's a reason why small habits work: because they stick. And this one? It's sticking. One more week. Let's see where this takes me. The plateau wasn't a failure. It was just part of the process. And the longer Grace stuck with it, the more she realized it wasn't about fast results or instant gratification. It was about building a new life, one sip at a time. It was the start of week 2, and Grace had reached the point where she was no longer obsessing over the scale. The plateau had tested her patience, but now, there was something different in the air. She had made it through the wall of discouragement, and it felt like she had just unlocked a new level in the game of self-care. As she prepared her glass that morning, she reflected on the past few days. Despite the lack of immediate changes, she had kept her routine intact. The mornings were easier now. The drink had become a ritual, something she no longer dreaded. It had become part of her day, as natural as brushing her teeth. The results may have been slow, but something was starting to click. The previous night, Grace had finally noticed a shift in her body when she was getting ready for bed. For the first time, she felt less bloated. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but it felt as if the heaviness that usually lingered in her abdomen was starting to lift. It wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable. Today, she was determined to focus on the good. As the warm liquid slid down her throat, she reminded herself of what she had already accomplished, not just the habit itself, but the mindset she had cultivated. She wasn't looking for a quick fix. She wasn't expecting instant results anymore. What mattered was the consistency and the fact that she was still showing up, even on the days when the scale didn't budge. Cynthia had texted her the night before, excited to report some small but significant progress. She'd been doing the drink for nearly a week, and although the changes weren't huge, she had felt more energetic and her digestion had improved. "I can't explain it, but my stomach feels flatter, and I'm not feeling sluggish at all after lunch. I think it's working." Grace smiled at the message, feeling encouraged. The support from Cynthia was a huge motivator for her. She wasn't alone in this anymore. They were in this together. And maybe that was the key: consistency, patience, and the support of someone who understood. That afternoon, Grace met Cynthia at the park for a walk. They strolled through the tree-lined paths, chatting about life as the sun filtered through the leaves. As they walked, Grace couldn't help but notice how much more vibrant Cynthia seemed. Her energy was undeniable. She wasn't dragging anymore, and she was talking animatedly about how she'd been sleeping better, feeling less bloated, and even losing a little weight. "I swear, Grace, my clothes are starting to feel a little looser," Cynthia said, her eyes lighting up. Grace's heart swelled with pride. Not just because her friend was seeing results, but because she was seeing them too. Cynthia glanced at her. "I'm not going to lie, I feel like I've hit a turning point. I know it's not some magical solution, but it's definitely working." Grace smiled. "Same here. I don't know what's changed exactly, but I feel like I'm on the right track." It was in that moment, as they walked side by side, that Grace realized something. The challenge wasn't about the drink or the results, it was about the journey. About being patient with herself, trusting the process, and knowing that even if the progress was slow, it was real. The next day, Grace woke up feeling lighter than she had in weeks. It wasn't a huge shift. There were no dramatic changes, but there was a subtle difference, a feeling of ease. She took the usual ingredients and made her drink, this time savoring it. She sat at the kitchen table afterward and checked in with herself. Her clothes fit a little better, and there was less bloat around her midsection. The scale hadn't moved much, but that was okay. The progress was happening in ways she couldn't measure in numbers. That afternoon, Grace went for her usual walk in the park. As she walked, she realized something. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about food all the time. She wasn't obsessing over every calorie, every snack, every bite. She had stopped tying her self-worth to the number on the scale, and it had freed her in ways she hadn't expected. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden hue over everything, and Grace felt a sense of peace. She had been so focused on weight loss that she hadn't realized how much stress had been weighing on her mentally and emotionally. Now, she was learning to tune into her body and listen to what it needed instead of constantly pushing for quick results. When she got home that evening, Grace received a message from Cynthia. The two had kept each other updated daily, but today, Cynthia seemed particularly excited. "Grace, I think it's finally happening. I just tried on a pair of jeans I haven't worn in months. They fit. I can't believe it." Grace's heart leapt. This was the moment they had both been waiting for, the moment when all the small changes finally started to add up to something tangible. "That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. We've got this." Her response was simple but full of excitement. Grace realized that it wasn't just the weight or the physical changes that mattered, it was the shift in mindset. This wasn't about fitting into a certain size or looking a certain way, it was about feeling confident, healthy, and in control. As she lay in bed that night, Grace reflected on the progress she had made. She wasn't at her goal yet, but she didn't need to be. For the first time, she felt like she was headed in the right direction. She closed her eyes and whispered softly to herself, "It's working. One sip at a time." Grace couldn't help but grin as she stepped out of the shower that morning. She hadn't been expecting it, but there it was, her reflection in the mirror was different. Not just the usual minor shifts she had noticed over the past week, but something more pronounced. Her stomach was flatter. Her skin was glowing. She could actually see the contours of her body in ways she hadn't in a long time. She stood there, frozen for a moment, just taking it all in. Could this really be happening? Grace touched her stomach lightly, still unsure if this was the result of the past few days or if her mind was playing tricks on her. But no. It was real. The change was tangible. She had finally broken through the wall. All the days of doubt, all the moments where she had almost given up, suddenly, they felt worth it. The small sips, the consistency, the habit she'd formed, it had paid off. Her phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her back to reality. It was a message from Cynthia. "Grace, you won't believe this. I'm down a full size in jeans. I swear, this drink is doing more than I ever imagined. Have you noticed anything new today?" Grace quickly typed back, "Yes. I've been feeling it too. My stomach is flatter. It's like something finally clicked." Cynthia responded almost immediately, "This is amazing. We've been doing this together for so long, and now it's finally happening." Grace smiled as she put the phone down. For once, she felt like the breakthrough wasn't just something she had hoped for, it was something she had worked for and earned. There was no magic pill. No easy fix. But there was consistency. And now, after weeks of dedication, she was seeing real results. Later that morning, Grace stood in front of her closet, trying on clothes. She had pulled out a pair of skinny jeans she hadn't worn in months, probably close to a year. She was about to try them on with low expectations, but as she slid them on, she felt something shift. They fit. Not just fit, but they fit comfortably. She zipped them up, feeling a surge of excitement. Grace turned side to side in front of the mirror. There it was again, her body was changing. It wasn't drastic, but it was noticeable. The difference was real. She laughed to herself, feeling a sense of pride. It wasn't the jeans that made her smile, it was the fact that she had stuck with it, even when it seemed impossible. Cynthia called a few minutes later, and Grace answered with an eager, "Hey. Okay, seriously, tell me you've noticed something today." "I just did a double take in the mirror. I'm feeling so much lighter." Grace could hear the excitement in her friend's voice, and it made her smile. "I tried on a pair of jeans I haven't worn in forever. They fit perfectly. I couldn't believe it." "No way. That's amazing." Cynthia cheered. "I feel like this challenge is finally doing what we hoped. Our bodies are actually changing." They both laughed, realizing that all the skepticism and doubts they had felt in the early days were now distant memories. The results were clear. "I never would have believed it would take this long," Grace said. "But now that it's happening, I'm so glad I didn't give up." "You're right. It's crazy how something so simple can make such a big difference," Cynthia agreed. "But I've learned that consistency matters. It always does." Grace couldn't have agreed more. That was the secret. It wasn't about magic or miracles. It was about building habits that stuck. Every small action she took had led her here, to this moment of real change. As the day wore on, Grace found herself looking at the mirror more often. She hadn't realized how much time she'd spent criticizing her reflection before. But today, she felt differently. She saw someone who had committed to a goal, put in the work, and earned results, not through shortcuts, but through steady effort. Her phone buzzed again, and it was another message from Cynthia. "Hey, I was thinking. We should do a 30-day challenge. I'm feeling good. I bet we could make it through an entire month of this and see even more changes. What do you think?" Grace read the message and grinned. She was already feeling great, but the idea of a full 30-day challenge sparked something inside her. She typed back, "I'm in. Let's do it. Let's see where we can go in a month." She hit send and leaned back, feeling a surge of motivation. They had made it this far, and now they were ready for more. This wasn't just about weight loss anymore, this was about taking control. This was about proving to themselves that they could do anything they set their minds to. That evening, Grace made her usual glass of the drink. The routine was no longer something she had to force herself to do, it had become part of who she was. She thought back to the days when she felt discouraged, when the scale wouldn't move and the results were slow. She had questioned whether it was worth it. But now, looking at her reflection in the mirror and feeling her jeans fit better, she knew it had all been worth it. This wasn't just about weight loss, it was about health. It was about consistency. It was about self-care, and it was about building a new mindset. As she sipped the drink that evening, she couldn't help but smile to herself. She had finally broken through. The breakthrough wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. She had shifted her focus from short-term results to long-term growth. Grace went to bed that night with a sense of peace. She was no longer worried about the results. She was focused on the process, the small steps she was taking every day. And for the first time in a long while, she was confident that those small steps were leading her somewhere amazing. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The sun was rising, casting soft golden rays into Grace's bedroom. She woke up feeling lighter, not just physically, but mentally. It had been a full 10 days since she started the drink, and although the changes were subtle, they were there. She could feel the difference in her body, and more importantly, in her mind. The frustration that had plagued her at the beginning of the journey had slowly been replaced by something else, peace. For the first time in a long while, Grace didn't feel the need to obsess over numbers or the mirror. She had learned something essential: the real transformation didn't happen overnight, and that was okay. In fact, it was more than okay, it was necessary. She walked to the kitchen to prepare her usual morning drink. The ritual had become second nature now. She reached for the familiar ingredients, a squeeze of lemon, a spoonful of honey, and the special mix that had started to work its magic. Sitting down with her drink in hand, she couldn't help but reflect on the past few days. She had started this journey with skepticism. At first, it felt like just another attempt at a quick fix, but now, after 10 days, Grace realized that this wasn't a quick fix at all. It was a slow, steady process of building habits, taking care of herself, and learning to trust her body. Cynthia had been texting her regularly, sharing her own successes and struggles. They had both made significant progress, but it wasn't always easy. They would text each other words of encouragement, reminding one another of how far they had come even when it felt like they were stuck. "Grace, I can feel it. My body's finally getting used to the routine. I'm not seeing huge changes in the scale yet, but I'm sleeping better, and my energy levels are way up. It feels like the drink is working even when I can't see the immediate effects." Grace smiled as she read Cynthia's message. It was clear that the small, everyday changes were starting to add up. She typed back a quick reply. "I feel the same way. It's amazing how much more energy I have, even without drastic changes. Just focusing on feeling good, instead of chasing the scale, has made such a difference." Grace realized that this shift in perspective was everything. They had both been focused so much on external results that they hadn't fully appreciated the internal changes happening. The energy, the clearer mind, the sense of well-being, it was all part of the transformation, even when the physical results didn't happen instantly. As Grace finished her drink and went for a walk in the park, she reflected on the power of patience. In the past, she had always rushed things, wanting immediate results, pushing herself hard in the gym, or following fad diets. But now, she was beginning to understand that real transformation came when she allowed things to unfold naturally, without forcing them. It wasn't about restricting herself or trying to force progress. It was about nourishing her body, creating a sustainable routine, and allowing time for the changes to stick. The drink, the walks, the quiet moments of reflection, each piece was important in the larger puzzle of her wellness journey. Back at home, Grace received a message from her sister, Natalie, who had been following her journey from the start. Natalie had been encouraging but hadn't been fully committed to trying the drink herself. "Okay, I'm going to try this. I've been watching you and Cynthia, and I think I'm finally ready to give it a shot. I'll start tomorrow." Grace chuckled to herself, feeling proud of her sister. Over the past few days, Natalie had been texting her questions, asking for more details about the drink, the routine, and the changes Grace was experiencing. It seemed like Grace's consistency and patience had started to inspire her, and now, she was ready to start her own journey. "I'm so excited for you. Take it slow, don't stress about perfection, and just focus on feeling good. The results will come." That afternoon, Grace found herself in a reflective mood. She took a break from work and sat by the window, watching the world go by. The view was peaceful, a perfect contrast to the whirlwind that had been her thoughts for so many years. She had spent so much time rushing through life, always striving for perfection, always feeling like she was behind. Whether it was about weight loss, career success, or relationships, there was always something more to achieve. But now, it was different. Grace wasn't chasing the next milestone, she was savoring each moment. The drink was just one small part of her journey, but it had brought clarity. By focusing on consistency rather than perfection, she was starting to enjoy the process. And that, she realized, was the key. The next day, Grace woke up feeling even more energized. She had developed a new appreciation for how much the drink had helped her shift her mindset. She wasn't just losing weight or feeling lighter physically, she was feeling lighter mentally too. As she prepared her glass that morning, she thought back to the first days of her journey. She had been desperate for results, checking the scale every morning, frustrated by the slow pace. But now, she wasn't looking for quick fixes. She was trusting the process, and it was paying off in ways she hadn't imagined. It was clear now that the journey wasn't just about physical transformation, it was about cultivating patience. True transformation required time, and that was something Grace was finally willing to give herself. Later that afternoon, Grace went out to run errands. She wore a pair of jeans she hadn't worn in a long time, and for the first time, they felt comfortable. Not tight, not uncomfortable, just right. As she walked through the store, she realized that she hadn't thought about food or calories in hours. She was simply living in the moment, feeling good in her body. She paused for a moment and smiled. It was the simple, quiet changes that made all the difference. The patience, the consistency, and the trust in herself. This was her breakthrough. As she left the store, Grace realized something. She had spent so many years searching for external validation. But now, she was finally starting to feel the validation from within. And that was the most powerful shift of all. Grace lay in bed that night, content with the progress she had made. The scale might not show dramatic changes, but her body felt different, her mindset felt different, and she felt more connected to herself than ever before. Patience, Grace thought, was the true secret. In a world that constantly pushed for more, for faster, for instant results, she was learning to slow down. She didn't need to rush. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Grace woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The past few days had been a revelation. As the weeks went by, the physical changes had become more noticeable, and the mental clarity she had gained was even more significant. The shift was real. What had started as a simple experiment with a glass every morning had become a full-fledged commitment to herself and her health. She stretched and smiled as the morning sunlight filtered through the curtains. The drink, the walks, the small, consistent choices, it had all contributed to this feeling. Grace felt stronger, not just in her body, but in her resolve. She had learned that this wasn't just about reaching a destination, it was about the journey, about making progress every single day. Sitting at her kitchen table, sipping her morning drink, Grace opened her phone to check her messages. Cynthia had been just as committed to the process, and they had become each other's accountability partners. Their regular texts had become a constant source of encouragement and motivation. Okay, so I've been thinking. I feel like we're at a turning point here. The drink's been amazing, but I want to see if we can take it to the next level. I'm thinking of adding a few more habits to the mix. What do you think? Grace immediately typed a response. I'm with you. What do you have in mind? I feel like we've made so much progress, and now it's time to build on it. Let's do it. Cynthia responded with an idea that both excited and challenged Grace. I'm thinking of introducing some light strength training and maybe cutting back on processed foods a little more. We've both been seeing amazing results with the drink, but let's see what happens when we combine it with some additional healthy habits. We can ease into it and see how it feels. Grace paused for a moment, reading the message again. Strength training. Cutting back on processed foods. These weren't drastic changes, but they felt like the next logical step. She had already made so much progress by committing to the drink every day. Maybe it was time to see what more her body could handle, especially if it was gradual and sustainable. She replied. I love it. I think we can do this. We've been building momentum, and this feels like the right next step. Let's start small and see how it goes. Later that morning, Grace went for a walk to clear her head. She had been feeling stronger lately, not just physically but mentally as well. The idea of pushing her limits a little bit didn't seem as daunting as it once would have. The drink had taught her patience and discipline, but it had also shown her the power of small, intentional changes. She didn't need to make everything perfect or strive for extreme results. Grace now understood that consistency was the key to sustainable success, not perfection. As she walked, she thought about how much had changed since she started. The daily glass wasn't just a routine anymore, it was part of her identity. It had become a ritual that grounded her, a habit that kept her focused on her well-being. And now, with the addition of light strength training and mindful food choices, she felt ready to take the next step. When Grace returned home, she opened the pantry to take a closer look at her eating habits. She had already made improvements, but she realized there was still room for growth. Processed snacks, sugary drinks, and takeout had been part of her life for so long. She had relied on them for convenience, comfort, and even out of habit. But now, something had shifted. Grace no longer felt as attached to those quick, unhealthy choices. She had learned to appreciate whole foods, meals that nourished her body rather than just filling her up. And while it wasn't always easy, she knew it was time to take her nutrition to the next level. Grace pulled out a few items that had been staples in her diet but that she now knew were holding her back. With a deep breath, she made the decision to slowly phase them out of her routine. She'd start with a small change, replacing one processed snack with something more nutritious, and build from there. That afternoon, Grace met up with Cynthia at their favorite coffee shop to catch up on their progress. Cynthia was as excited as Grace about the new plan, and they were both eager to start incorporating new habits. You ready for this? Cynthia asked, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Grace nodded, feeling a surge of excitement. I've never felt more ready. I think this is the next step. We're not aiming for perfection, just consistent, manageable progress. And I know we can do it together. They both agreed that the key was to make sure they didn't overwhelm themselves with too many changes all at once. They would ease into strength training and slowly cut back on processed foods. The goal wasn't to transform overnight, it was to create sustainable habits that would lead to lasting results. As they sipped their drinks, Grace realized that their bond had deepened throughout this process. They were no longer just friends who shared workout tips or diet advice. They had become true partners in their journeys, supporting each other through the ups and downs, celebrating each small victory. Back home, Grace spent the evening preparing a healthy dinner, experimenting with a new recipe that incorporated more vegetables and lean proteins. She had gotten creative in the kitchen, trying new spices and cooking techniques that made her meals exciting and flavorful. After dinner, she sat down with her journal to reflect on the past few weeks. She had come so far. From the initial skepticism and frustration to now, where she felt healthier, more balanced, and more at peace with herself. The drink had been the catalyst, but it was the changes in her mindset, her habits, and her approach to health that had truly made the difference. Grace had realized that the road ahead wasn't about rushing or pushing for perfection. It was about patience, consistency, and listening to her body. As long as she kept moving forward, no matter how small the steps, she would continue to make progress. She closed her journal and smiled. The road ahead was long, but she felt ready for it. And with Cynthia by her side, she knew they could tackle anything together. Grace fell asleep that night with a sense of calm. She had done the work, and now, she was ready for whatever came next. The drink had been the starting point, but the true transformation was just beginning. She was embracing each moment, trusting the journey, and building the foundation for lasting change. She had learned that the road ahead wasn't just about achieving a flat belly or burning fat, it was about living a healthier, more balanced life. And that, to her, was the ultimate victory. Grace woke up to the sound of her alarm ringing, the light from the morning sun already creeping in through the blinds. She stretched and smiled, knowing that today would be another step in her journey. But as she sat up, the reality of the week ahead hit her. There were meetings to attend, errands to run, and, of course, the constant demands of life that always seemed to make things just a little more complicated. The changes Grace had made in her routine, the daily drink, the walks, the adjustments to her diet, had become part of her, a natural rhythm. But now, she faced a new challenge. How could she balance her healthy habits with the busyness of everyday life? How could she continue to take care of herself while meeting the responsibilities that never seemed to stop? As she moved to the kitchen to prepare her drink, she reflected on the excitement and motivation she had felt in the past few weeks. Everything had been going so well. She had been feeling better, physically and mentally. But as the days passed, she was beginning to feel the pressure of trying to maintain all the new habits she had incorporated into her routine. She had been diligent about the drink, but the new strength training routines and the changes to her diet required time and energy. Work was demanding, and she had to balance her social life and family obligations as well. It was starting to feel like a lot to juggle. She sat down at the table with her glass of the morning drink, trying to quiet the overwhelming thoughts that had started to creep in. The pressure to keep up with everything was building. How could she stay consistent with her new lifestyle without burning out? Grace knew she wasn't the only one feeling this way. Cynthia had been texting her about similar struggles, work, social obligations, and just the sheer challenge of fitting everything into a busy day. But what Grace had learned in the past few weeks was that the key was not to try to be perfect. It was about finding a balance and staying focused on what mattered most, her health and well-being. She decided to text Cynthia to check in. "Hey, how's it going? I've been feeling like I'm struggling a little with balancing everything lately. Work is crazy, and I'm trying to stick with the strength training and healthy eating. Any tips on how you're managing all of this?" A few minutes later, Cynthia replied. "I feel you. It's been tough for me too, especially with everything else going on. What's been helping me is just keeping it simple. If I can't do a full workout, I'll squeeze in something quick, like a 10-minute bodyweight circuit. And when it comes to food, I'm focusing on just making one healthy choice a day, no need to overhaul everything all at once. Small wins add up." Grace smiled as she read Cynthia's message. It was a simple, yet powerful reminder that progress didn't require perfection. If she couldn't stick to everything 100% every day, that was okay. The key was to keep moving forward, even if it meant making adjustments along the way. Grace replied. "I love that. Small wins, right? I think I've been trying to do too much at once. I'll focus on making one good choice and not stress about getting it all right every day." Cynthia's reply was immediate. "Exactly. And don't forget, we've both come so far already. A little flexibility goes a long way." Feeling encouraged, Grace decided to take the day one step at a time. After finishing her drink, she decided to focus on a quick walk instead of her usual long one. It wasn't about doing everything perfectly, it was about being consistent. She wasn't going to let the busyness of her life derail her progress. She slipped on her sneakers, grabbed her water bottle, and went out for a walk around the block. It wasn't the long, leisurely stroll she had become accustomed to, but it was something. It was enough. And she knew that by making this small effort, she was still prioritizing her health, no matter how busy the day got. Later that afternoon, Grace found herself at her desk, working through emails and meeting deadlines. The workday was hectic, and her mind was racing. She felt the familiar pull to grab a quick snack, something to give her a boost of energy. But as she reached for the snacks in her drawer, she paused. She thought back to the choices she had been making over the past few weeks. She had been focusing on healthier alternatives, and she didn't want to undo her progress by falling back into old habits. Instead of reaching for the chips, Grace chose an apple and a handful of almonds. It wasn't the most exciting snack, but it was a better choice, and she felt good about it. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be consistent. Every small choice, every moment of mindfulness, was a step in the right direction. That evening, Grace prepared a simple dinner: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and quinoa. It wasn't the most elaborate meal, but it was nourishing and filling. She had learned that eating didn't have to be complicated. The key was to keep it balanced, to focus on whole, unprocessed foods that would fuel her body rather than weigh it down. She thought about how she had been approaching food in a more intuitive way lately. Instead of obsessing over calories or portion sizes, she had been listening to her body. She was learning to eat for energy, for nourishment, not out of habit or stress. As she sat down to enjoy her meal, Grace realized that the balance she was seeking wasn't just about managing her time. It was about balancing the demands of life with the need for self-care. She had learned that taking care of herself didn't have to be a huge, overwhelming task. It was the small moments, the morning drink, the quick walk, the healthy snack choices, that added up and made a difference. Grace knew that she couldn't control everything in her life. There would always be challenges, deadlines, and unexpected events. But what she could control was her commitment to herself and her well-being. And that, she decided, was worth prioritizing. As the evening winded down, Grace felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had made it through the day, balancing work, social obligations, and her health. And though it hadn't been perfect, it had been enough. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The journey was far from over, but she was learning how to navigate it. With patience, consistency, and a little flexibility, Grace knew she could continue moving forward, one step at a time. Grace woke up feeling a little different today. The usual excitement that accompanied her morning routine was absent. She stretched her arms and let out a soft sigh, her mind swirling with thoughts of everything she had to do. But it wasn't just the responsibilities that were weighing on her, it was the nagging feeling that she was somehow failing. The past few days hadn't been kind. Despite her best efforts to maintain her new habits, life had thrown a curveball her way. She had caught a cold. It wasn't serious, but it was enough to throw her off track. She had missed her morning walks, skipped the strength training, and even the usual drink had become a distant thought. Her body felt sluggish, and her energy was low. As she sat at the kitchen table, sipping a hot tea, she couldn't help but feel frustrated. The past few weeks had been a time of progress and growth, but now it felt like everything had come to a halt. She had been so consistent, and now, she felt like she was back at square one. Grace's phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Cynthia. "Hey, how's everything going? I know you were feeling great, but I wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" Grace took a deep breath before typing her reply. "I've hit a bump in the road. I've been sick the past couple of days and haven't been able to stick to my routine. It's frustrating. I feel like I'm undoing all my progress. A few moments later, Cynthia responded. I hear you. I've been there before, and it's tough. But remember, this is just a setback, not the end of the journey. You've been doing amazing, and one setback doesn't erase all the hard work you've put in. Take your time, rest up, and then get back at it when you're ready. You've got this. Grace read Cynthia's message several times. It was a reminder she desperately needed to hear. Setbacks were a part of life. No one could stay on track 100% of the time. What mattered was how she responded to them. Cynthia was right. A few days off didn't mean she had to give up on her goals entirely. After finishing her tea, Grace sat on the couch and let herself relax for a while. The past few days of rest had allowed her body to recover, but she couldn't ignore the unease bubbling inside her. She felt like she was losing momentum. What if this cold was a sign that she wasn't as strong as she thought? What if she couldn't handle the demands of her new routine? But then, she thought about everything she had accomplished in the past few weeks. She had been consistent. She had shown up for herself, day after day. She had learned to prioritize her health, and that wasn't something that could be undone by a temporary setback. Grace took another deep breath. The key wasn't to ignore the frustration but to work through it. She needed to remember why she started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. The next morning, Grace woke up with a new perspective. She was still recovering, but she had decided that today would be the day she started easing back into her routine. It wouldn't be the same as before, she wasn't going to jump straight into her full workout or push herself too hard. But she could start with something small, something manageable. She went for a light walk around her neighborhood, keeping it slow and steady. It felt good to be outside, to move her body again. She wasn't expecting to feel the same level of energy as before, but the walk reminded her that progress didn't have to be grand, it could be as simple as taking one step at a time. When she returned home, she made herself a smoothie, packed with fruits, vegetables, and protein. It was a reminder that self-care didn't have to be an all-or-nothing approach. Every choice she made mattered, even if it was a small one. Throughout the day, Grace continued to take things slowly. She didn't try to catch up on everything she had missed. Instead, she focused on getting back into the swing of things at her own pace. And while she still felt a little tired, there was a sense of peace that came with letting go of the pressure to be perfect. She wasn't failing, she was simply recovering, and that was okay. By the evening, Grace had come to a profound realization. Setbacks were a part of the process. Life would always throw challenges her way, and sometimes, those challenges would disrupt her progress. But it wasn't the setbacks that defined her, it was how she responded to them. She realized that resilience wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and continuing to move forward. Setbacks didn't mean the end of her journey. They were just opportunities to grow stronger, to develop a deeper understanding of herself, and to continue building the habits that had already made such a difference in her life. Later that night, Grace sent Cynthia a message to update her on her progress. Thanks for the pep talk. I've started getting back into my routine, but I'm taking it easy. It feels good to move again, even if it's just a little. I'm learning that setbacks don't define me, I'm not giving up. I'm just moving forward at my own pace. Cynthia's reply came quickly. I'm so proud of you. It's all about balance, and you're doing amazing. You've got this, and you'll come back even stronger. Don't forget to be kind to yourself. Grace smiled as she read Cynthia's words. She had always been hard on herself, expecting perfection in everything she did. But now, she understood that it was the small, consistent steps that made the biggest difference. She didn't need to rush. She just needed to keep moving forward. As Grace got ready for bed that night, she reflected on everything she had learned. Setbacks weren't failures, they were part of the journey. Life would always have its challenges, but she now knew that resilience wasn't about avoiding those challenges. It was about facing them head-on, learning from them, and continuing to grow. Grace closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace. Tomorrow would be another day. And no matter what it brought, she would take it one step at a time. Grace woke up the next morning feeling lighter, both physically and emotionally. The past few days had been a roller coaster of self-doubt and frustration, but there was a noticeable shift in her mindset now. She no longer felt as burdened by the pressure to be perfect. Instead, there was a quiet sense of acceptance, a feeling that she was exactly where she needed to be in her journey. As the soft rays of sunlight filtered through her bedroom window, Grace sat up and stretched, feeling a gentle warmth in her chest. She wasn't back to her usual routine yet, but she had made peace with taking things slow. She had learned that her journey wasn't defined by how fast she could go, it was about consistency and being kind to herself along the way. She reached for her phone and scrolled through a few messages. One from Cynthia stood out. "Morning. I've been thinking about something. I've noticed how hard you've been on yourself lately. You've been making incredible progress, and I just want you to remember that you don't have to do everything perfectly. Don't let the setbacks discourage you." Grace paused for a moment, reflecting on Cynthia's words. How often had she been her own harshest critic? How many times had she berated herself for not doing enough, for not sticking to her routine perfectly? In all of her striving for progress, she had forgotten one critical thing: compassion. As she made her way to the kitchen to prepare her morning drink, Grace thought back to a conversation she had with her therapist a few weeks ago. They had discussed the importance of mindset and how the way she viewed herself and her journey would shape her experience. At the time, Grace had been focused on tangible results, losing weight, getting stronger, eating cleaner, but now she realized there was something deeper at play. It wasn't just about physical changes, it was about emotional growth, self-acceptance, and learning how to embrace the journey without fixating on perfection. Grace poured the ingredients into her blender, but this time, as she added the drink, she found herself smiling. The act of making this drink had become a ritual, something that grounded her. It wasn't just a way to nourish her body, it was a reminder that she was taking time for herself, showing up for herself in a way she never had before. She sipped the drink, savoring the familiar taste. And for the first time in a while, she didn't feel rushed. There was no pressure to do more, be more, or fix anything. She was simply present. As the day went on, Grace made a conscious effort to adopt a new perspective. She started noticing how often she was quick to criticize herself or second-guess her choices. If she missed a workout or didn't have the energy to make a perfect meal, she would automatically feel like she had failed. But today, she was choosing not to go down that path. Instead of focusing on the things she hadn't done, Grace focused on what she had achieved. She had made small, healthy choices every day. She had shown up for herself when it was hard, when the doubts crept in. And she had learned to keep moving forward, even when things didn't go as planned. At work, Grace found herself in a meeting with her team, discussing the upcoming quarter's goals. Normally, she would have felt the familiar anxiety creeping up as the pressure mounted, but today, something was different. She felt calm, centered. She realized that her mindset was shifting. She no longer felt like she had to prove herself to everyone. Instead, she was simply doing her best, and that was enough. As the meeting concluded, Grace sent a quick message to Cynthia. "Hey, I've been thinking a lot about what you said this morning. You're right. I've been way too hard on myself. Today, I decided to stop focusing on what I haven't done and start appreciating what I have accomplished. I'm learning to show myself some compassion." Cynthia's response was almost immediate. "That's awesome. You've come so far, Grace. You're doing amazing. Self-compassion is everything. Keep going at your own pace, and don't forget to celebrate the small wins." Later that afternoon, Grace took a break to go for a walk. She felt lighter, both physically and emotionally. The walk was a simple one, but it was something she had been pushing herself to do regularly. Today, it didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like a gift she was giving to herself, a moment to just be present and breathe. As she walked, she noticed how different everything seemed. The trees were greener, the air fresher. The world seemed to slow down, and she couldn't help but smile. In that moment, Grace realized that she had been so focused on the end result that she had missed out on the joy of the process. The small, everyday choices she had been making were just as important as any grand achievement. That evening, Grace prepared a simple dinner: grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a side of quinoa. It wasn't the most elaborate meal, but it was nourishing and exactly what she needed. As she sat down to eat, she found herself feeling grateful. Grateful for the food on her plate, for her health, and for the journey she was on. She also felt grateful for the lessons she had learned. The past few weeks had been filled with challenges, but each one had taught her something valuable. She had learned to listen to her body, to show up for herself, and to be kind when things didn't go according to plan. As Grace finished her meal, she felt at peace. There was still much to do, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't rushing toward the finish line. She was allowing herself to be present in each step, knowing that each one brought her closer to becoming the person she wanted to be. That night, before going to bed, Grace wrote in her journal. "Today, I learned that the journey isn't just about the destination, it's about how I show up along the way. I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be present, to be kind to myself, and to keep moving forward at my own pace. The small wins add up, and I'm proud of how far I've come." She closed her journal and took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. Tomorrow would be another day, and Grace was ready to embrace it with a new perspective, one rooted in self-compassion, patience, and the understanding that progress was not a race, but a journey. The first thing Grace did when she woke up that morning was take a deep breath. It wasn't a conscious effort, it was just how she had begun starting her days recently. A simple breath, a pause to center herself. She'd been learning that sometimes, taking a moment to just breathe was all she needed to remind herself that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. For the past few days, she had found herself feeling more grounded. Her body was recovering, her mind was clearer, and the worries that used to cloud her thoughts had dissipated. She had been consistent in her actions, small steps every day, and those small steps were adding up in ways she hadn't anticipated. She walked into the kitchen, where the familiar ingredients for her morning drink sat neatly on the counter. She had made this drink so many times now that it had become an ingrained habit, almost like second nature. Grace took comfort in the predictability of it. The routine was no longer a struggle but a part of her day that she looked forward to. As she blended the ingredients together, she couldn't help but smile. It wasn't about the drink itself, it was what the drink represented: consistency. Over the past few weeks, she had learned the importance of showing up for herself, even when it felt like there was little immediate reward. The real changes were happening behind the scenes, where consistency was quietly shaping her body, her mindset, and her life. Sipping the drink, Grace sat at the kitchen table, reflecting on her journey. A year ago, she would have scoffed at the idea of a daily routine. She had always been the type of person who wanted quick results, immediate satisfaction. But now, something had shifted within her. She had learned that real, lasting change wasn't about drastic actions or overnight transformations. It was about the power of small, consistent actions done over time. She had noticed subtle changes in herself, both physically and mentally. She felt more energized, her clothes fit better, and her skin looked healthier. But it wasn't just the physical changes that had surprised her. It was the way she now viewed herself, her self-worth, and her capabilities. She had started to trust herself more, to believe that she could stick with something and see it through. After finishing her morning drink, Grace headed out for her walk. It was a crisp, cool morning, and the air felt refreshing as she moved through the neighborhood. As she walked, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come. There had been days when it felt like nothing was happening, when progress seemed non-existent. But looking back now, she saw how much she had transformed. It wasn't a dramatic shift, it had been a series of small, intentional decisions that had led to this point. She thought about how easy it would have been to give up when things didn't go as planned, when she got sick, or when she missed a workout. But the key, she realized, was that she didn't give up. She had kept going, no matter how small the steps. She had kept showing up. Grace knew that consistency wasn't always glamorous. It wasn't about the perfect workout or the ideal meal. It was about doing what you could, when you could, and sticking with it day after day, even when the results weren't immediately visible. It was about trusting the process. Later that morning, Grace received a call from her brother, David. He had been following her journey from afar and had been impressed by her dedication and progress. "Hey, Grace. I just wanted to say I'm really proud of you," David said when she picked up. "You've been working so hard, and I can see the changes. It's inspiring, honestly." Grace felt a warm rush of gratitude. "Thanks, David. It's been a journey, for sure. But I've realized something: I don't need to be perfect. I just need to keep showing up every day, even on the tough days." David chuckled. "That's the secret, huh? Consistency." "Exactly," Grace said, a smile tugging at her lips. "It's not about the big, dramatic changes. It's about doing the little things day in and day out. It adds up over time." David paused for a moment, and Grace could hear the smile in his voice. "You've got this. Keep it up. I'm cheering you on." By mid-afternoon, Grace felt a sense of accomplishment. She hadn't done anything extraordinary, but she had stayed true to her commitments. She had moved her body, eaten nourishing foods, and taken care of her mental health by staying present and patient. These small actions, when strung together, were creating a life she could be proud of. Grace sat at her desk, going over some work tasks, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Cynthia. "How's the day going? I know you've been on a roll lately, but remember, consistency is key, even when it feels like nothing is happening. You're doing great, don't forget that." Grace smiled as she read the message. She had heard Cynthia say those words countless times, but today, they resonated with her in a way they hadn't before. It was a reminder that the results she was seeking were already unfolding, even if she couldn't always see them. She didn't need to measure her progress by instant results or perfect days. She just needed to keep doing the work, one step at a time. That evening, as Grace prepared her dinner, she felt proud of herself. It wasn't a fancy meal, but it was healthy, balanced, and satisfying. She had spent the day focusing on the small things, things that didn't seem significant in the moment but that, when looked at collectively, were creating real change. As she sat down to eat, Grace realized that she had stopped comparing herself to others. She had stopped trying to follow someone else's idea of success. Instead, she was creating her own path, one small, consistent action at a time. She knew that this was just the beginning. The work she was putting in now would continue to pay off in the months and years to come. She had learned the most important lesson: it wasn't about perfection, it was about the daily commitment to herself. And through that commitment, she was becoming a stronger, healthier, and more resilient version of herself. Grace smiled to herself as she finished her meal. Tomorrow would be another day. But now, she knew that as long as she stayed consistent, the results would come, even if they took time. The journey wasn't about rushing to the finish line. It was about trusting that the small steps, taken day after day, would lead her exactly where she wanted to go. It was the fourth week of Grace's new routine, and she could feel the weight of the challenge creeping up on her. The changes in her body, both physical and emotional, had been noticeable at first. She'd felt lighter, more energized, and had started to see the fruits of her labor. But now, it felt like the progress had slowed, almost come to a halt. She stood in front of the mirror, examining herself, searching for the changes that had once been so apparent. The scale hadn't moved much, and her clothes fit the same. It felt as though she had reached a plateau, that frustrating period when things no longer seemed to improve, no matter how hard she tried. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was all of this for nothing? Was she doing something wrong? She exhaled deeply, trying to push away the frustration that was beginning to surface. It was a familiar feeling, one she'd experienced before when faced with obstacles. But Grace knew something now that she hadn't understood before. Plateaus weren't signs of failure. They were just part of the process. Grace remembered a conversation she had with Cynthia a few days ago, when she had mentioned feeling discouraged. You know, Cynthia had said, plateaus aren't permanent. They're just a signal that your body has adapted to the routine, and it's time to push it in a new direction. The key is to keep going, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Those words echoed in her mind now as she stood in front of the mirror. It wasn't about seeing instant changes. It was about pushing through those moments when everything seemed stagnant, trusting that the work she was putting in would eventually break through the resistance. That afternoon, Grace decided to take a different approach. She wasn't going to let this plateau control her. Instead of feeling defeated, she would embrace this moment as an opportunity for growth. She knew that when her body became accustomed to one routine, it was time to switch things up. Change was often necessary to keep the momentum going. She sat down at her kitchen table, pulling out a notebook to brainstorm. It was time to take her routine to the next level. She began by reviewing what she had been doing. The morning drink, which had become such a comforting ritual, was still serving its purpose. She'd been walking every day, but it might be time to add something else. A more intense workout, perhaps. Or a new type of exercise that challenged her muscles in different ways. She felt excited by the possibilities. But it wasn't just about adding new physical activities, it was also about refocusing her mindset. Maybe she needed to challenge herself to approach her goals from a different angle. Rather than seeing this plateau as a setback, she would see it as an opportunity to grow stronger, both mentally and physically. Grace spent the next few hours researching new workout routines. She had been sticking to her daily walks and basic strength training, but she realized it was time for a change. She found a routine that included yoga and some bodyweight exercises that she'd never tried before. She was eager to mix things up and push her body in new ways. After finding a plan that felt doable, she committed to adding these new exercises to her routine. But she also reminded herself to be patient. Just because she hadn't seen immediate changes didn't mean that her efforts weren't working. The next morning, Grace woke up feeling motivated. The plateau had been a challenge, but she had taken control of it. As she prepared her morning drink, she reflected on her decision to make adjustments, not just to her workouts, but to her mindset. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but nothing ever truly worthwhile came easily. She headed to the living room, cleared some space, and began the new routine. The yoga stretches felt foreign at first, but after a few minutes, Grace could feel the tension in her body beginning to melt away. The bodyweight exercises were tough, but she pushed through them, reminding herself that this was the change her body needed. She realized that the plateau hadn't been a sign to quit, it had been an invitation to grow. Every time she faced a challenge in her life, she had a choice, to back down or to rise to the occasion. And today, she chose to rise. As the week went on, Grace felt stronger. The new workout routine was tough, but she felt a renewed sense of determination. She had pushed through the plateau, and even though the results weren't immediate, she knew she was on the right path. The changes would come, just like they had before. She just needed to trust the process and stay committed to the journey. One evening, Grace caught up with Cynthia over the phone. "I feel like I'm finally getting back on track," Grace said, her voice full of relief. "I made some changes to my routine, and it's like a switch flipped. I'm feeling stronger, and the frustration I had is starting to fade." Cynthia's voice was full of excitement. "That's amazing. I knew you'd break through. You've got this." Grace smiled, feeling a sense of pride swell within her. "It wasn't easy, but I'm learning that plateaus are just part of the process. They're not permanent, and they don't define my progress. I just have to keep showing up. A few days later, Grace noticed something in the mirror. She looked different. She felt different. Her body was transforming again, in ways she hadn't expected. Her waistline had started to slim down, and there was more definition in her arms and legs. It wasn't a drastic change, but it was enough to show her that she had broken through the plateau. Grace knew that the journey ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would be other plateaus, other challenges, and moments of doubt. But now, she understood the importance of consistency and adaptability. She had learned that she didn't have to follow a linear path. The journey was going to have its ups and downs, but the key was to keep going, to stay committed, and to trust that the effort would pay off. That night, as Grace lay in bed, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had learned so much about herself in the past few weeks, not just about her body, but about her resilience and her ability to rise to the occasion. The plateau had been a moment of testing, but now, it felt like a victory. Tomorrow, she would keep going. One step at a time. She was stronger than ever before. Grace never thought she'd look forward to Monday mornings, but lately, they had started to feel different. Energizing, even. The kind of day that used to fill her with dread had become a chance to reset, realign, and continue building on the new habits she had been working so hard to maintain. She stirred her morning drink, the now familiar blend of lemon, ginger, turmeric, apple cider vinegar, and warm water, and thought about how far she'd come. But this morning, something else was on her mind: people. The ones who had helped her along the way. Because no matter how disciplined she had been lately, Grace knew something for certain: she didn't get here alone. It had started weeks ago with Cynthia's messages, small check-ins that kept Grace from spiraling when things got tough. Then came the unexpected support from her brother David, who texted her quotes and motivational videos. And now, to her surprise, her small circle had expanded. A few days ago, Grace had posted in a local women's wellness group on Facebook, sharing her experience with the morning drink and the changes she had noticed. She wasn't trying to be inspirational, she was just being honest. But something about her vulnerability resonated. Comments poured in. Likes. Shares. Women her age, even some younger, reached out saying, "This is what I needed to hear." One woman named Allison messaged her privately. "Hey Grace, your post hit home. I've been struggling to get started. Would you be open to checking in once a week? Accountability, maybe?" Grace smiled reading it. She hadn't considered herself a mentor, or even consistent enough to hold someone else accountable, but maybe that was the point. She wasn't perfect. She was real. And that made the difference. So Monday morning became something new. Grace opened a new group chat with Cynthia, Allison, and another woman named Cheryl who had joined later. The chat's name? The Morning Winds. She typed a quick message. "Morning, ladies, made my drink and did 15 minutes of yoga. Feeling strong. Let's make this a good one." Almost instantly, responses chimed in. Cynthia. "You already know I had that spicy lemon drink first thing. Hit 10,000 steps yesterday. Let's keep going." Allison. "Struggled to get out of bed, but I'm dressed and on the mat now. That's a win, right?" Cheryl. "Still sore from Saturday's squats lol. But I'm in. Let's do this." Grace felt a warmth in her chest. This wasn't just about weight loss anymore. This was about building something bigger than herself, a system of support, of accountability, of shared purpose. It motivated her to show up, not just for herself, but for the women who were watching her and walking the journey with her. At work, Grace's mood carried over. She found herself more present in meetings, more engaged with coworkers. She brought her lunch from home now, no longer out of guilt, but because it made her feel better. Stronger. In control. Her boss, Claire, even noticed. "Grace, I don't know what's in that lemony-looking thing you drink every morning, but you've been on fire lately. Keep it up. Grace laughed. It's not magic, but it helps me show up for myself. That's what's been different. Claire raised her coffee in a mock toast. To showing up. Later that day, Grace had a check-in Zoom call with Allison. They didn't have a formal plan, just 15 minutes of FaceTime, once a week, to talk about the ups and downs. Allison looked tired but hopeful. I almost skipped this call. Work was rough, my kid has a cold, and I haven't worked out since Thursday. Grace nodded with empathy. That's life. But the fact that you're here right now, showing up anyway. That's huge. That's the win. Allison sighed with relief. I guess I keep expecting to do this all perfectly. But watching you keep going, even after setbacks, makes me feel like I can keep trying too. Grace smiled. It's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent, even when life throws curveballs. We don't have to do it alone. That night, as Grace journaled before bed, she reflected on how different this journey felt from the ones she'd tried before. In the past, it was always about going solo, grinding in silence, trying to fix herself behind closed doors. But this time, with a small but growing circle of women supporting each other, she felt unstoppable. She wrote in her journal. Accountability isn't pressure. It's partnership. It's knowing someone else believes in you even when you're not sure yourself. That's what's helping me stay the course. She thought about how, in the early days, she felt like it was a weakness to ask for help. Like she needed to do it all alone to prove something. But the truth was, letting others in didn't make her weaker, it made her stronger. Together, they were all pushing forward. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, Grace grabbed her blender and stood in her kitchen, sleepy but steady. She thought about the women who would be checking in soon. She thought about the person she had been just a month ago, tired, defeated, unsure if she'd ever feel like herself again. And now, she felt alive. Not because everything was perfect. Not because she had all the answers. But because she had found her rhythm. Her tribe. Her strength. She lifted her glass and whispered to herself with a grin. Here's to showing up. Grace wasn't expecting the phone call. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon, the kind that made the whole world feel heavy. She had just wrapped up a client call, planning to take a short walk before finishing the rest of her workday. Her phone buzzed, Mom flashing across the screen. She answered with a smile. Hey, Mom. Everything okay? But the moment she heard her mother's voice, shaky, low, cracking at the edges, Grace's heart dropped. It's your Uncle James. He's in the hospital. They think it's his heart. Grace blinked, her thoughts immediately scattering. Her Uncle James wasn't just a relative. He was the person, her childhood cheerleader, the one who made her laugh when her dad left, who showed up for her soccer games when no one else did. And now, he was in the ICU. Is he conscious? Grace asked, her voice tight. Barely, her mom whispered. They're doing everything they can. Grace barely remembered the rest of the call. She hung up and just sat there, frozen. Her palms sweaty. Her heart racing. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She had spent the last few weeks building so much momentum, emotionally, physically, spiritually. But this moment hit her like a freight train. Her first instinct was to shut down. Emotional pain always pulled her inward. That old voice crept in, the one that told her this is too much, you can't handle this, you're not strong enough. She found herself staring at the fridge, tempted to just reach for comfort food and disappear into the couch. She felt the tears welling. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to give up. But then, like a flicker in the dark, another voice surfaced, stronger now. Breathe. Don't numb it. Feel it. Stay with yourself. She stood still, eyes closed, letting the tears fall silently down her cheeks. Then she reached for her notebook and wrote one word at the top of a blank page. Resilience. It would have been easy to fall back into old patterns, to use this crisis as an excuse to spiral. But Grace had worked too hard. She had tools now. A routine. A community. A new version of herself that didn't hide from pain, but faced it. She walked to the kitchen and, almost on autopilot, started preparing her drink. The smell of ginger and lemon grounded her. The warmth of the cup in her hands reminded her, she wasn't powerless. She sipped, breathing deeply between gulps. Then she opened the group chat. Hey ladies, tough day. Just got news that my uncle is in critical condition. Feeling shaken. But I made the drink. I'm here. Almost instantly. Cynthia. Sending love. You're strong, Grace. Lean on us. Allison. You don't have to carry this alone. One sip at a time. One moment at a time. Cheryl. Take care of your heart. Let yourself grieve and keep showing up. That's what strength looks like. Grace's tears returned, this time, from gratitude. The next morning, she visited the hospital. The beeping machines. The antiseptic smell. Her uncle looked small, pale, surrounded by wires. Her mom sat at his bedside, clutching his hand. Grace leaned in and whispered, Hey, Uncle Jay, it's me. You've got this, okay? You always told me I was strong. Now it's my turn to believe the same about you. She stayed for hours. Talking to him. Reading to him. Even sneaking in one of the ginger drinks she'd made for herself in a thermos. It grounded her in that sterile room, a quiet defiance against fear and helplessness. The following days were a blur. Hospital visits. Tense updates. Crying on the couch. But through it all, Grace didn't let go of her anchors, her daily drink, a short walk, her check-ins. Even on the nights she collapsed into bed exhausted, she found moments to journal, to reflect. One entry read. I'm in the storm, but I haven't lost myself. That's the difference. The old me would have shut down. This me. I keep breathing. I keep moving. I keep trusting. A week later, her uncle opened his eyes. Slowly, weakly, but he was awake. Grace cried harder than she had in years. He smiled faintly, and his fingers twitched in hers. Hey, kiddo, he rasped. That one phrase, so familiar, so full of life, was all she needed to know, he was coming back. When Grace left the hospital that night, she didn't go home and collapse. She took a walk under the stars. Cool breeze on her face. Air sharp with spring. She thought about what it meant to be resilient, not just to bounce back, but to hold steady through the storm. To keep doing the small things, especially when everything felt like it was falling apart. She hadn't skipped a single day of her routine. Not because she was chasing a perfect record, but because it gave her something solid to hold on to. And now, emerging from the most emotionally taxing week of her year, she realized something. She trusted herself. No matter what came next, plateaus, crises, setbacks, she could meet it. She had already proven that. She opened the group chat. Uncle James is awake. We're not out of the woods, but he's fighting. I've never felt more grounded in my life. Thank you all for holding space for me. Cynthia replied instantly. You held space for yourself, Grace. That's what makes you powerful. Grace never set out to inspire anyone. She started this journey for herself, for her health, her healing, her sanity. But now, something had shifted. The ripple effects of her transformation had reached farther than she ever imagined. It started small. A comment here. A message there. Strangers thanking her for being real. Women saying they'd finally gotten out of bed, gone for a walk, or made that first glass of her now famous morning drink, all because of her. And today, as Grace stared at the email in her inbox, she felt her heart thud a little harder than usual. Subject line, invitation to speak, Women's Wellness Webinar. The sender was a health coach she'd followed online for years, someone with tens of thousands of followers. The email was kind, warm, and direct. Grace, your story has made its way to me through several mutual contacts. Your voice, your honesty, and your approach to change are exactly what we want our community to hear. Would you be open to sharing your journey in our next webinar? Nothing fancy, just you, your truth, and what's worked for you. Grace leaned back in her chair, blinking. Talk. To an audience? On camera? She'd never done anything like that before. Her instinct told her to say no. She was just Grace. A woman in her 50s trying to get her life back together. Who was she to be giving advice? But then she thought of Allison, of Cheryl, of the women in her message inbox who said you made me believe I could do it too. This wasn't about being an expert. It was about being real. She clicked reply. I'd be honored. When the day of the webinar arrived, Grace felt the nerves bubble in her chest. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror adjusting the collar of her soft blue blouse, hands trembling slightly. Okay, she whispered to her reflection. You don't have to be perfect. Just be honest. Before logging in, she took a sip of her morning drink, her ritual, her anchor, and let the warmth of it ground her. The host introduced her with enthusiasm, calling her a beautiful reminder that transformation isn't about age, but about belief, consistency, and courage. Then the screen shifted, and suddenly, it was just Grace, facing dozens of little squares filled with faces, watching, listening. She cleared her throat. Hi, everyone. I'm Grace, and I never thought I'd be speaking at something like this. Honestly, when I first started, I was at one of the lowest points of my life. Physically, emotionally, just lost. But I made one choice. Just one. I started drinking this crazy little concoction every morning, ginger, lemon, apple cider vinegar. Not because I believed it was magic. But because I needed something, a reason to get out of bed, a reason to show up for myself. That one choice led to others. Small ones. A short walk. A journal entry. Reaching out to a friend. And slowly, I started to change. She paused, then added. It wasn't perfect. There were days I cried. Days I wanted to quit. Days I plateaued, got sick, felt like nothing was working. But I kept showing up. Because that's the secret, right? Change doesn't happen in a single decision, it happens in the decisions we make every day, when no one's watching. For the next 20 minutes, Grace shared her story. She talked about Uncle James. About the panic attacks. About the support group. About learning that she didn't have to do it alone. And she ended with this. If you take nothing else away from this talk, let it be this: you don't have to be perfect to change your life. You just have to be willing to keep trying. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. When the webinar ended, the chat box lit up like a Christmas tree. Dozens of messages. Some simple thank yous. Some tearful stories. And one from a woman named Rachel. I've been scared to start. I'm 62 and haven't believed in myself in years. But after hearing you, I just made my first glass. I'm starting today. Grace stared at the screen, tears in her eyes. That was it. That was everything. That night, Cynthia called her. You crushed it, she said. You don't even know the number of lives you just touched. Grace laughed through her tears. I wasn't trying to be anyone's hero. Cynthia responded softly, Exactly. That's why you are. The next morning, Grace's phone buzzed non-stop, DMs, invites, and even a local news feature request. But she wasn't chasing fame. What mattered to her was the spark she saw in others. A woman in Idaho. A retired teacher in New York. A cancer survivor in Texas. They were all starting their own journeys. And Grace? She had become the guide she never had. Not because she had a perfect body. Not because she had a six-figure brand. But because she had shown up, one imperfect day at a time, and told the truth about it. That weekend, Grace hosted a small in-person gathering at the park, a morning wellness circle, as she called it. 10 women showed up. They brought yoga mats, smoothies, and nervous smiles. Grace led a stretch, shared her drink recipe, and talked about mindset. And when the event ended, one woman stayed behind. Her name was Carla. "I almost didn't come," Carla said. "I've failed so many times I thought, why try again?" Grace looked her in the eye. "You came. That's what matters. Showing up is success. Everything else grows from that." Carla wiped a tear from her cheek and hugged her tightly. That night, Grace journaled. "I used to think I had to fix myself. But what I really needed was to believe in myself. And now I get to help others believe too. What's one small choice that changed your life?" That's the question Grace was asked at the wellness panel she spoke at last weekend. She smiled before answering. "One glass. Every morning. Not just because of what it did to my body, but because of what it reminded me, I'm worth showing up for." It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't some breakthrough with fanfare and lights. Just a quiet decision, repeated day after day. A drink. A walk. A stretch. A journal entry. A conversation. A refusal to disappear. Now, she was a completely different woman than the one who'd broken down on her couch 7 weeks ago, overwhelmed, alone, and exhausted by life. That Grace had felt buried. But this Grace? She had risen. Spring had bloomed fully in Seattle. Grace's backyard was alive with flowers she barely remembered planting. Her skin glowed from the inside out. Her morning ritual was no longer an act of desperation, it was a declaration. Every sip reminded her that change wasn't reserved for the young. It belonged to the willing. This morning, as she stood at the kitchen window sipping her drink, a soft breeze floated through. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Elon. Yes, that Elon. Months ago, she had jokingly tagged him in a social media post where she said, "Forget rocket fuel. This morning drink is the real launch pad." She didn't expect a response. But apparently, someone on his team saw it. And forwarded it. Now he was inviting her to record a short testimonial as part of a longevity and innovation campaign. "Everyday humans building extraordinary resilience," the email said. Grace stared at the screen, stunned. She laughed out loud. "You've got to be kidding me." But she wasn't dreaming. The transformation that started with one glass had launched her somewhere even she couldn't have predicted. Later that day, she met Cynthia for lunch at their favorite cafe. They sat outside under a striped umbrella, both radiant in the golden sunlight. "You're glowing," Cynthia said with a grin. "Is it the drink, or the Elon thing?" Grace laughed. "A little bit of both. But honestly, I think it's peace." She paused. "I didn't think it was possible, CYN. I thought that kind of peace belonged to younger women. To people without regrets. But I've learned it's never too late to come home to yourself." Cynthia raised her smoothie. "To coming home." They clinked glasses. That evening, Grace went for a walk alone. The sky was painted in deep lavender and gold, and the air smelled like jasmine and fresh rain. She thought about all the women still waiting on perfect timing. Still waiting to feel ready. Still putting themselves last. If only they knew what she knew now. You don't wait to be ready. You become ready, by beginning. At home, she opened her laptop and began drafting a new blog post. Her first official entry as a contributor to the Everyday Resilience Project. The title? The Morning That Changed My Life. In it, she wrote. I didn't wake up one day magically motivated. I woke up tired, aching, and full of doubt. But I made a drink. I sipped. I breathed. And I did it again the next day. And the next. Until the sip became a spark, and the spark became a fire. She hit publish and sat back. Then she picked up her phone and recorded a short voice note for the Women's Wellness Network. Hey friends. If today feels heavy, if your body feels foreign, if your hope feels thin, I want you to know this: you're allowed to start over. You're allowed to begin again at any age, in any season, without permission. I did it with a drink, a walk, and a journal. But more than anything, I did it by deciding I was worth it. She ended with her signature line. It's not magic, it's momentum. Dar. Elena Woods, a licensed nutritionist and behavioral psychologist who followed Grace's story, was interviewed for a wellness podcast and asked about Grace's impact. Grace is a perfect example of behavioral stacking, she said. A single positive habit triggering another. She built sustainable change not by aiming for perfection, but by honoring consistency and connection. Her story reminds us that healing isn't just physical, it's emotional, relational, and deeply personal. At the end of the documentary series based on Grace's story, she leaves viewers with one final thought as she stands on a quiet beach, waves brushing her feet. If you're still breathing, you haven't missed your chance. You don't need a perfect plan, just one reason to start. For me, it was one glass. What will it be for you? She turns to the camera and smiles. Hit subscribe. And leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark your new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when life gets hard?